A hint of color to what remains of Art House, a home for recovering addicts on their journey to sobriety. Darlene Dominguez is a supervisor at the facility and last week helped her 25 residents narrowly escape the fast-moving Eaton fire.
It's devastating. It's devastating.
The experience of losing one's home in a fire is traumatic for anyone, but for those overcoming addiction, Darlene says it can be completely destructive.
When you're an addict, you lose everything in your addiction, and then you come here and you start off new, and you're clean, and you work hard to get where you're at, and then it just goes. It's very devastating for a recovering addict.
She understands this deeply. Darlene is 5 years sober and once
Good evening, I'm Josh Robin, and you're watching a special report here on Spectrum News. It's now just after 7:55 p.m. in the nation's capital, and the 46th President of the United States, Joe Biden, will soon deliver a final farewell address from the Oval Office. This will be the 5th Oval Office address of Biden's presidency, and we know he will speak about what he's accomplished in the past 4 years as he ends more than 55 years in elected office. No doubt he will also speak about the major news from today, the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. Let me bring in our panel, Spectrum News political reporter Ayanna Harry, political anchor Alex Cohen, but we'll start at the White House with Spectrum's Evan Kosloff. And Evan, let's turn now to the Middle East and Biden's involvement in this. The ceasefire deal was very much a long time in the making. What can you tell us?
Right, definitely momentous moment for the Middle East and the entire world here, and it was being celebrated at the White House earlier in the day when President Biden was out here basically taking credit, or a lot of the credit, for the negotiations, in part saying that it was the toughest negotiations I've ever been a part of. That was the words from President Joe Biden earlier in the day. Let's talk about some of the details of this deal. So this is phase one of the negotiations, and this would mean a 6-week pause in the fighting, and that would bring home some 33 of the Israeli hostages that were being held by Hamas and their allies. Also, Israel would release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners through this agreement. Also, Palestinian civilians would be able to return to North Gaza freely. And on top of that, the Israeli military would pull out of population centers, major population centers, while still leaving a military presence along some of the borders. And then also this would allow for that humanitarian aid to pour into the enclave after 15 months of violence there in Gaza. Of course, President Biden taking credit, but also we should note that the incoming president, Donald Trump, also taking a lot of the credit on social media. Not only was he messaging about this, saying that all hell would break out, those were his words, if the hostages were not released by Inauguration Day, but beyond messaging, he actually had somebody from his staff, Steve Witkoff, joining the negotiations along with the Biden administration to try and get this deal. So really what we're seeing, Josh, is celebrations where both the Democrat and the Republican came together to try and get these hostages back.
Yeah, some bipartisan work that actually got this deal. We'll see if it's implemented this weekend. Let's turn now to Ayanna Harry. What do you expect to hear from the president in just a few minutes, apart from what Evan was just talking about, which is the Middle East deal?
Yeah, Josh, I expect to hear the president explain to Americans why he believes the nation is stronger today than 4 years ago. Remember, when Joe Biden first took the office, the nation was still grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic. So President Biden worked to balance the public health crisis as well as America's economic comeback. And we've often heard President Biden speak about job creation during his time in office. 16 million new jobs have been created under the Biden administration. And the president also worked to touch Americans in key and important ways, including lower prescription drug prices, also working to eliminate student loan debt for some Americans. And the president has also focused on making investments in clean energy to help lower the impacts of climate change.
And Alex, certainly the president is going to talk about that which he sees as positive, but his poll numbers are horrendous. What do you see as his legacy now, and do you think it's a complicated legacy that may improve with time?
It is a very complicated legacy. You know, all the topics we've been hearing about, you think about him ending the longest war, our conflict with Afghanistan, but what many would say was a botched withdrawal from that country. I think it's safe to say that he will leave with a very mixed legacy. And unlike other former presidents, such as Jimmy Carter, who also left office with the country deeply unhappy with him, Joe Biden is older, and he will not have that same amount of time, one would imagine, to have those many, many decades afterwards to do other sorts of things that might lead to a more nuanced picture. I think another thing to watch tonight is how he communicates what he has done, because that was an issue that many people saw in this last year's election, his failure to really communicate clearly what he had done and what he would continue to do if elected for a second term, Josh.
Briefly, back to you. Do you expect that the president will mention the incoming president, Donald Trump, a former rival, someone who he has tangled with so many times, Evan? I'm wondering if you feel that there will be a discussion as well as to what this new president will do.
I don't think he will mention him by name in that kind of Harry Potter-esque sort of way, but I think it's safe to say that there probably will be lines delivered this evening that you don't have to dig that deep to hear him issuing a warning, because it's very clear Donald Trump has come in with a very different agenda, and I think it's pretty safe to say that Joe Biden will deliver some warnings about the best ways not only to preserve our democracy, but to preserve peace throughout the world and to try to preserve our planet. It will be interesting how much of this speech is directed towards the next administration.
And for those who are in favor of bipartisanship, and that's something that the president has talked about, although not specifically here, there was a lot of bipartisanship that went on with this peace deal, with Steve Witkoff working with the outgoing administration. Alex, we have about just 10 seconds. Any thoughts on that?
I hope he does really talk tonight about the spirit and how important it is to have both sides of the aisle working together. That's what he was known for, especially early on in his career. And I think there's a good chance that he'll talk about that spirit of cooperation.
Okay, and the president is going to be speaking in just a moment. Let's listen in.
My fellow Americans, I'm speaking to you tonight from the Oval Office. Before I begin, let me speak to important news from earlier today. After 8 months of nonstop negotiation, by my administration, a ceasefire and a hostage deal has been reached by Israel and Hamas, the elements of which I laid out in great detail in May of this year. This plan was developed and negotiated by my team and will be largely implemented by the incoming administration. That's why I told my team to keep the incoming administration fully informed, because that's how it should be, working together as Americans. This will be my final address to you from the American people from the Oval Office, from this desk as president. And I've been thinking a lot about who we are and maybe more importantly, who we should be. Long ago in New York Harbor, an iron worker installed beam after beam, day after day. He was joined by steel workers, stonemasons, engineers. They built not just a single structure, but a beacon of freedom. The very idea of America was so big, we felt the entire world needed to see. The Statue of Liberty, a gift from France after our Civil War. Like the very idea of America, it was built not by one person, but by many people, from every background and from around the world. Like America, the Statue of Liberty is not standing still. Her foot literally steps forward atop a broken chain of human bondage. She's on the march, and she literally moves. She was built to sway back and forth to withstand the fury of stormy weather, to stand the test of time because storms are always coming. She sways a few inches, but she never falls into the current below. An engineering marvel. The Statue of Liberty is also an enduring symbol of the soul of our nation. A soul shaped by forces that bring us together and by forces that pull us apart. And yet through good times and tough times, we've withstood it all. A nation of pioneers and explorers. of dreamers and doers, of ancestors native to this land, of ancestors who came by force. A nation of immigrants came to build a better life. A nation holding the torch of the most powerful idea ever in the history of the world, that all of us are created equal, that all of us deserve to be treated with dignity, justice, and fairness, that democracy must defend and be defined and be imposed, moved in every way possible. Our rights, our freedoms, our dreams. But we know the idea of America, our institution, our people, our values that uphold it are constantly being tested. Ongoing debates about power and the exercise of power, but whether we lead by the example of our power or the power of our example, whether we show the courage to stand up to the abuse of power or we yield to it. After 50 years at the center of all of this, I know that believing in the idea of America means respecting the institutions that govern a free society, the presidency, the Congress, the courts, a free and independent press, institutions that are rooted, they just not reflect the timeless words, but they echo the words of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Rooted in the timeless words of the Constitution, we the people. Our system of separation of powers, checks and balances, it may not be perfect, but it's maintained our democracy for nearly 250 years, longer than any other nation in history that's ever tried such a bold experiment. In the past 4 years, our democracy is held strong. And every day I've kept my commitment to be president for all Americans through one of the toughest periods in our nation's history. I've had a great partner in Vice President Kamala Harris. It's been the honor of my life to see the resilience of essential workers getting us through a once-in-a-century pandemic, the heroism of service members and first responders keeping us safe, the determination of advocates standing up for our rights and our freedoms instead of losing their jobs to an economic crisis that we inherited. Millions of Americans now have the dignity of work. Millions of entrepreneurs and companies creating new businesses and industries, hiring American workers, using American products. And together, we've launched a new era of American possibilities. One of the greatest modernizations of infrastructure in our entire history, from new roads, bridges, clean water, affordable high-speed internet for every American. We invented the semiconductor, smaller than the tip of my little finger, and now is bringing those chip factories and those jobs back to America where they belong, creating thousands of jobs. Finally, giving Medicare the power to negotiate lower prescription drug prices for millions of seniors. And finally, doing something to protect our children and our families by passing the most significant gun safety law in 30 years and bringing violent crime to a 50-year low, meeting our sacred obligation to over 1 million veterans so far who are exposed to toxic materials, and to their families, providing medical care and education benefits and more for their families. You know, it will take time to feel the full impact of all we've done together. But the seeds are planted, and they'll grow and they'll bloom for decades to come. At home, we've created nearly 17 million new jobs, more than any other single administration in a single term. More people have health care than ever before. And overseas, we've strengthened NATO. Ukraine is still free. And we've pulled ahead of our competition with China. And so much more. I'm so proud of how much we've accomplished together for the American people. And I wish the incoming administration success, because I want America to succeed. That's why I've held my duty to ensure a peaceful and orderly transition of power, to ensure we lead by the power of our example. I have no doubt that America is in a position to continue to succeed. That's why my farewell address tonight, I want to warn the country of some things that give me great concern. And this is a dangerous that's a dangerous concentration of power in the hands of a very few ultra-wealthy people. And the dangerous consequences if their abuse of power is left unchecked. Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead. We see the consequences all across America, and we've seen it before. More than a century ago, but the American people stood up to the robber barons back then and busted the trusts. They didn't punish the wealthy, just made the wealthy play by the rules everybody else had to. Workers want rights to earn their fair share. You know, they were dealt into the deal, and it helped put us on a path to building the largest middle class, the most prosperous century any nation in the world has ever seen. And we've got to do that again. In the last 4 years, that is exactly what we've done. People should be able to make as much as they can, but play by the same rules, pay their fair share in taxes. So much is at stake. Right now, the existential threat of climate change has never been clearer. Just look across the country, from California to North Carolina. That's why I signed the most significant climate and clean energy law ever in the history of the world, and the rest of the world is trying to model it now. It's working, creating jobs and industries of the future. Now, we've proven we don't have to choose between protecting the environment and growing the economy. We're doing both. But powerful forces want to wield their unchecked influence to eliminate the steps we've taken to tackle the climate crisis, to serve their own interest for power and profit. We must not be bullied into sacrificing the future of our children and our grandchildren. We must keep pushing forward and push faster. There's no time to waste. It's also clear that American leadership in technology is an unparalleled source of innovation that can transform lives. We see the same dangers of the concentration of technology, power, and wealth. You know, his farewell address, President Eisenhower spoke of the dangers of the military-industrial complex. He warned us then about, and I quote, the potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power, end of quote. 6 decades later, I'm equally concerned about the potential rise of a tech-industrial complex that could pose real dangers for our country as well. Americans are being buried under an avalanche of misinformation and disinformation, enabling the abuse of power. The free press is crumbling. Editors are disappearing. Social media is giving up on fact-checking. The truth is smothered by lies told for power and for profit. We must hold the social platforms accountable to protect our children, our families, and our very democracy from the abuse of power. Meanwhile, artificial intelligence is the most consequential technology of our time, perhaps of all time. Nothing offers more profound possibilities and risk for our economy and our security, our society, for humanity. Artificial intelligence even has the potential to help us answer my call to end cancer as we know it. But unless safeguards are in place, AI could spawn new threats to our rights, our way of life, to our privacy, how we work, and how we protect our nation. We must make sure AI is safe and trustworthy and good for all humankind. In the age of AI, it's more important than ever that the people must govern. And as the land of liberty, America, not China, must lead the world in the development of AI. You know, in the years ahead, it'll help to be, it's going to be up to the president, the presidency, the Congress, the courts, the free press, and the American people to confront these powerful forces. We must reform the tax code, not by giving the biggest tax cuts to billionaires, but by making them begin to pay their fair share. We need to get dark money. That's that hidden funding behind too many campaigns contributions. We need to get it out of our politics. We need to enact an 18-year term limit, time and term, for the strongest ethics reforms for our Supreme Court. We need to ban members of Congress from trading stock while they're in the Congress. We need to amend the Constitution to make clear that no president is immune from crimes that he or she commits while in office. The president's power is not limited. It's not absolute, and it shouldn't be. And in a democracy, there's another danger to the concentration of power and wealth. It erodes the sense of unity and common purpose. It causes distrust and division. Participating in our democracy becomes exhausting and even disillusioning. And people don't feel like they have a fair shot. We have to stay engaged in the process. I know it's frustrating. A fair shot is what makes America, America. Everyone's entitled to a fair shot. Not a guarantee, but just a fair shot. An even playing field. Going as far as your hard work and talent can take you. We can never lose that essential truth, remain who we are. I've always believed, and I've told other world leaders, America can be defined by one word: possibilities. Only in America do we believe anything is possible. Like a kid with a stutter from modest beginnings in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Claremont, Delaware, sitting behind this desk in the Oval Office as President of the United States. That's the magic of America. It's all around us. Upstairs in the residence of the White House, I've walked by a painting of the Statue of Liberty I don't know how many times. In the painting, there's several workers climbing on the outstretched arm of the statue that holds the torch. It reminds me every day I pass it of the story and soul of our nation and the power of the American people. There's a story of a veteran. This is a veteran, the son of an immigrant, whose job was to climb that torch and polish the amber panes so rays of light could reach out as far as possible. He was known as the keeper of the flame. He once said of the Statue of Liberty, quote, speaks a silent universal language, one of hope, that anyone who seeks and speaks freedom can understand. Yes, we sway back and forth to withstand the fury of the storm, to stand the test of time. A constant struggle, a short distance between peril and possibility. But what I believe is the America of our dreams is always closer than we think. And it's up to us to make our dreams come true. Let me close by stating my gratitude to so many people, to the members of my administration, as well as public service and first responders across the country and around the world. Thank you for stepping up to serve. To our service members and your families, it's been the highest honor of my life to lead you as Commander-in-Chief. And of course to Kamala and our incredible partner, the historic Vice President. She and Doug have become like family, and to me, family's everything. My deepest appreciation to our amazing First Lady who's with me in the Oval today, for our entire family. You're the love of my life and the lives of my love. My eternal thanks to you, the American people. After 50 years of public service, I give you my word. I still believe in the idea for which this nation stands. A nation where the strengths of our institutions and the character of our people matter and must endure. Now it's your turn to stand guard. May you all be the keeper of the flame. May you keep the faith. I love America. You love it too. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you for this great honor.
All right, just a little over 17 minutes there. President Joe Biden giving his farewell address to the American people. He talked about what his administration accomplished and, more broadly, his goal of restoring, as he calls it, the soul of this nation and nourishing democracy in the United States and freedom around the world. Let me bring in our Spectrum News panel, political reporter Ayanna Harry, political anchor Alex Cohen, but we'll start at the White House with Spectrum's Evan Koslov. Evan, this is the president's farewell speech. Certainly he'll be in the public eye, but not with this kind of platform again. What were your thoughts?
Well, I think what he was trying to do is write that first draft of history to decide what his legacy will be, because there really are two different versions of the Joe Biden story. You know, will it be the statesman that spent 36 years in the Senate and then 8 years as a vice president before coming here to the Oval Office as president? Is that how he'll be remembered? Or is it going to be instead be that, you know, he's leaving office after one term with low approval ratings, dogged by major issues like inflation that was high during his term, the surge of migrants that we had on the southern border, the chaotic withdrawal in Afghanistan, for example. I think he was really trying to set the stage for how he wants to be remembered. You know, he used really poetic language in there. I even wrote down and underlined the word patriotic as he was talking, but buried in there were details about specific legislation that he had passed as the president. You know, I saw references to the bipartisan infrastructure law, for example, funding projects across the country, references to the CHIPS Act, which is enforcing the creation of chips here in the U.S., the American Rescue Plan coming out after the pandemic response, the Inflation Reduction Act, one of the biggest investments into climate. And so I think what he's trying to do is to say, maybe you're not seeing all these results just yet, but that they will make a positive difference, he believes. I wrote down this quote because I thought it was notable. He said, "It will take time to see the impacts, but the seeds are planted." So I think it's interesting, Josh, we have him trying to set the stage for what his legacy will be.
Alex, your thoughts?
History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes, is the old quote that really comes to mind this evening. I was deeply struck by our president saying that an oligarchy is taking shape in this country. A farewell speech very similar to that of Dwight Eisenhower many decades ago, a very stern warning, and the wagging finger that we saw about the state of so much in our country. Again, as predicted, he did not mention Donald Trump by name, but it certainly seems very clear who this was directed at. And the question, as I heard it from our current president, is what is going to happen in this next administration? Is this truly going to be an opportunity to do something new, different, shake things up and make this a better, stronger America? Or is this, in fact, just a very small group of very wealthy, mostly men, who are in it for themselves, for the power? And that, I thought, was a very stern warning.
Yeah, I agree. Ayanna Harry, your thoughts?
Well, I think President Joe Biden was really seeking to shift the conversation and the narrative around his 4 years in the White House. President Biden has taken so much criticism from his handling of the economy, on immigration. And during this speech, Joe Biden tried to remind Americans of some of the ways in which he has been able to make progress on bringing violent crime down, getting gun safety legislation passed, lowering prescription drug costs. But again, we're going to have to wait and see how he is remembered in the history books, because President Joe Biden continues to face that criticism over his decision to run for a second term in the White House. Many view that as opening up the door for the now president-elect to instead be returning to the White House.
Yeah, that's a huge part of his legacy. Ayanna Harry, thanks so much. Alex, the president started talking about the Statue of Liberty, and then during this, and he returned to the Statue of Liberty theme at the end, he talked broadly about institutions of our democracy, of our democratic republic, our government, the separation of powers, the press, the courts. But trust in these institutions has been tanking in recent years. You know, it seems a bit cynical to suggest, but I wonder if this speech changes any of that.
Well, I'm going to bring out another quote here. The medium is the message. And yes, this is an American institution that a president, when he is leaving office, will deliver this sort of address. But we are not living in a traditional kind of world. And you compare and contrast this very traditional at the Resolute desk, right, with the pictures behind him in primetime TV, with the social media posts that we see from our incoming president on his Truth Social channel. That's night and day. And I think, this is the message that Americans seem to be most used to now, is this very quick, very stark, very sharp, always kind of pushing against the other side sort of message. And that's the antithesis of what we saw in every way, shape, and form this evening. So you have to wonder, is this going to be something that really does have Americans thinking seriously about the future? Does this sway any hearts and minds? And I'm sad to say, most likely not.
Well, hope springs eternal. Let's turn over to Evan. And Evan, I asked before about Alex what you think, what she thinks his legacy will be, Joe Biden. Briefly, what do you think Joe Biden's legacy will be?
Well, I think it's interesting. When he was first elected to the Senate, he was criticized for being too young. At the time, he was, I believe, 29 years old, and at the time there was concern about whether he was old enough. Now, of course, he leaves as the oldest president in history. That will change with President-elect Donald Trump by the end of his term. But, we have to wonder again about whether it's going to be the decades of service that he spent that's going to define his legacy, or if it's going to be that perhaps he overstayed his welcome. I mean, we have to think back to June when they had that disastrous debate on stage, and that led to the unprecedented decision for him to drop out of the race. And at the time, I think there was a lot of discussion about whether this would taint his legacy, and the reality at the moment was, well, it really depends on if his vice president can pull off the victory. Obviously, now we know that she could not, and President-elect Donald Trump is on his way back to the White House. And so I do think in the history books, you got to think that's going to be one of the first sentences in the biography about President Joe Biden, that he did have to leave the race after running that first term. And he spoke a lot about being a transition candidate when he first ran to try and make Trump a one-term president. He was successful at that moment. And you have to wonder how different history would be and how he would be looked at differently if he did decide not to run for a second term, and how that will impact his legacy. That's going to be one thing that the historians are going to have to decide many years from now, Josh.
Okay, Ayana, about 30 seconds. Your thoughts on his legacy?
Yeah, I think historians will question why President Joe Biden did not take action sooner on the border in terms of immigration. That was a serious issue that certainly continued throughout his presidency, and also why President Biden didn't change his tone and his message to the American people about the economy. We constantly heard the White House say Bidenomics is working. Meanwhile, Americans were feeling the pinch from inflation, and the president really didn't address that in a timely manner, I think.
Yeah, for someone who had lived during the Carter administration and seen how upset Americans get by inflation, one would think he had learned politically what the lesson was. Ayana Harry, thank you so much. Also want to thank Alex Cohen and Evan Kosloff. Thanks so much. A momentous day covering here the news out of Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm Josh Robin. More news straight ahead here on Spectrum News.
Friday nights, The Big Deal with Errol Lewis, where Spectrum News' local political journalists break down the most important issues shaping our nation.
Our journey towards improving mental health doesn't always present a clear path. Every Thursday on Your Mental Health, we listen to voices across our communities, discussing the challenges of everyday life and presenting accessible resources to guide us along the path to our well-being, providing hope and empowering choices that light the way to a healthier you.
Your Mental Health with Dr. Nicole Clark, Thursdays on Spectrum News Plus, available on all your favorite devices.
At Spectrum Enterprise, we give over 80% of the Fortune 500 the technology solutions they need to meet their growing business demands. Whether it's ultra-fast connectivity, seamless transactions, safe and secure data, or reliable always-on technology, these businesses demand better. and we're here to deliver it. Get a network you can rely on with our 100% uptime SLA guarantee.
Whether it's our stories, the warmth of our laugh, or our family's secret sauce, we all bring something different to the table. So make some space. The power of connection is waiting right outside your comfort zone. Learn how you can help strengthen your community at belongingbeginswithus.org/teamup.
Here's the deal. Following the election, people need a place to explore national issues that have an impact on their community. To understand those issues better, we're bringing together our team of local political journalists from across the country to break down what's happening. So join us every week to catch up on the key stories making a big difference across the nation and in your local community.
Watch The Big Deal with Errol Lewis Friday nights at 9 Eastern, 8 Central on Spectrum News Plus. Available on all of your favorite devices exclusively on Spectrum. Spectrum News Plus. Local stories, connecting communities. Streaming now on the Spectrum News app and free with your Spectrum subscription.
I'm Sharon Tazwell. Here's your Spectrum News in 90. Israel and Hamas have agreed to a deal to pause fighting in Gaza. Qatar's prime minister confirmed Wednesday the agreement will lead to the phased release of hostages, including Americans and Palestinian prisoners. The Israeli cabinet still needs to approve the agreement. President Biden hopes a permanent end of the war is in sight.
The road to this deal has not been easy, and we reached this point because of the pressure that Israel built on Hamas, backed by the United States.
Millions are on edge as wildfires rage in Southern California. But firefighters may soon catch a break as windy conditions are expected to ease Wednesday evening. More than 90,000 households were without power Wednesday to prevent lines from sparking new blazes.
We were able to make some progress, get some of those containment lines done, really mop up some of the areas that were hot so that when the winds do come, it doesn't blow an ember up and over the containment lines.
U.S. regulators are banning the dye called Red 3 from the food supply. The FDA granted a petition filed by consumer advocates that argues the dye causes cancer in laboratory rats. The ban removes the product from foods, dietary supplements, and oral medicines, all by the year 2028. And that's your Spectrum News in 90.
I'm meteorologist Brittany Hamilton. Looking at our forecast focus, we have Arctic air that's going to be on the move for parts of Southern California. Those winds decreasing as we get into Thursday, so that's some good news for the firefighting effort. Snow will continue around the Great Lakes. We'll see a peak in that as we go through Thursday. And then we're talking about a brief warm up before that Arctic air comes in for early next week.
Too many innocent people have died. Too many communities have been destroyed. In this deal, the people of Gaza can finally recover and rebuild.
Israelis and Palestinians taken to the streets Wednesday night celebrating a ceasefire agreement intended to bring hostages home for both sides. The deal ending more than 15 months of fighting between Israel and Hamas. Thanks for joining us. I'm Sharon Tazwell. While the Israeli cabinet still needs to approve the agreement, President Biden says it's a start to bringing a permanent end to the war in Gaza. Spectrum's Daniel Grimes is in Washington with a closer look at the deal.
Celebrations in Gaza after the announcement that 15 months of fighting between Israel and Hamas will end, at least for now.
This deal will bring us peace, hopefully, at the end of it.
Flanked by his Vice President Kamala Harris and his Secretary of State Antony Blinken, President Joe Biden made it official, a final diplomatic victory just 5 days before leaving office.
With nowhere to turn, Hamas finally agreed to releasing hostages.
Under phase one of the deal, Hamas Hamas will release 33 hostages, Israel will free scores of Palestinian prisoners, and Israeli troops will partially withdraw from Gaza. Both sides will also pause fighting for at least 6 weeks to allow for more food and other aid into Gaza. Phase 2 calls for the release of the remaining hostages in Gaza and the full withdrawal of Israeli troops from the territory, officially ending the war. Phase 3, rebuilding Gaza. President-elect Donald Trump swiftly took credit for the agreement, writing that it only happened because of his victory in the November election. Biden was more magnanimous, saying he ordered his negotiators to coordinate with Trump's representatives because the incoming administration will have to oversee the implementation of the deal. But Biden said the deal mirrored the peace plan he offered last year, and that his support of Israel since Hamas went to war 15 months ago enabled Israel to prevail and forced Hamas to seek a resolution.
I've worked in foreign policy for decades. This is one of the toughest negotiations I've ever experienced. And we reached this point because of the pressure that Israel built on Hamas, backed by the United States.
7 of the hostages being held by Hamas are American. The president says some of them will be released in the first phase. Now, Netanyahu and his full cabinet will have to approve the terms before the ceasefire officially begins this weekend. In Washington, Dana Grimes, Spectrum News.
On Capitol Hill, a new round of confirmation hearings underway as nominees for Donald Trump's incoming administration face tough questions from senators. Among those in the hot seat, Trump's pick for Attorney General Pam Bondi and Senator Marco Rubio, Trump's choice for Secretary of State. National political reporter Taylor Bapalars is in Washington with the highlights.
Former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi made her case to senators Wednesday for why she should be the top law enforcement officer in the country.
America will have one tier of justice for all.
Democrats tried, but largely failed, to get Bondi to distance herself from or reject Trump's false claims about the 2020 election and the Justice Department's 2 prosecutions of him. She said Joe Biden is president, but would not acknowledge that he won the 2020 election fairly.
Who won the 2020 presidential election?
Joe Biden is the president of the United States.
Ms. Bondi, you know that there is a difference between acknowledging it and, I can say that Donald Trump won the 2024 election. I may not like it, but I can say it.
Bondi declined to back away from her 2023 vow that bad prosecutors will be prosecuted, a comment seen as embracing Trump's desire to go after those who investigated him. And she sidestepped questions about whether she would resist any effort by Trump to influence the Justice Department's prosecutorial decisions. Florida Senator Marco Rubio received a more bipartisan welcome at his confirmation hearing to be Secretary of State.
I can't think of a better nominee.
The president made a great decision in choosing you.
But it was the announcement of a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas that broke during the hearing that took center stage, with Rubio calling the release of hostages vital to stopping the war.
These people, that include a number of American citizens, need to be home as soon as possible, and that will remain a priority in any engagement that we're involved in with regards to not just a ceasefire, but some permanent peace process moving forward.
Rubio also faced questions about the war in Ukraine, China, and Iran. He echoed Trump's stance on dealing with each country or conflict. Both Rubio and Bondi appear to be on track for Senate confirmation, although Bondi is likely to receive at least some no votes from Democrats. In Washington, Taylor Bapalars, Spectrum News.
The hours ahead are critical for firefighters battling the Los Angeles wildfires. Winds are expected to ease further Wednesday evening, giving crews a chance to gain more control. Spectrum's Ariel Wessler is in Los Angeles with a look at where the fires stand as search and rescue efforts move forward.
The parking lot outside the Santa Anita racetrack here in Arcadia has been turned into a donation center. You can see all the boxes of clothing behind me. There's also water, hygiene products, and even toys. One organizer tells me more than 3,000 people so far have shown up to get the essentials they so desperately need as fire crews continue their work on the front lines.
In the past 24 hours, there's been little to no fire growth on both incidents.
CAL FIRE confirming Wednesday they may be getting the upper hand on 2 of the state's most destructive fires ever. the Palisades and the Eaton. Containment on both has risen slightly since Tuesday. However, air quality is posing serious health concerns. Around 17 million residents are under advisories for wind-blown ash and dust through Wednesday evening, and there are many other fire zone hazards yet to tackle,
including downed power lines, broken gas lines, hazardous materials, and unsafe water.
It's a key reason residents aren't yet being allowed back into the burn areas to check on their homes. The investigation into potential causes continues. Analysis of images from satellites and a wildfire camera suggests the Palisades fire might have ignited near the burn scar from a blaze earlier this month. And in the Eaton fire, newly released video of flames near an electrical tower on January 7th might provide a clue to its origin. Wednesday, LA's fire chief pushed back on criticism about her department's wildfire response.
I can tell you and stand before you, we did everything in our capability to surge where we could.
The LA City Council has adopted several new measures in response to this disaster. They include speeding up federal emergency funding, assessing the potential for mudslides, and protecting against evictions and price gouging. California's insurance commissioner has also expanded his one-year moratorium on insurance cancellations. Ariel Wessler, Spectrum News.
U.S. regulators banning red dye 3 from the nation's food supply. We'll tell you why, plus what it means for some products you could have in your home. Just ahead.
Our daily decisions can have a massive impact on the quality of our lives. From the foods we eat to the places we live and everything in between, our health can send us on a quest for answers. Join me as we break down the science and politics behind some of the most important topics affecting our communities and learn what we can do about them.
Watch Exploring Your Health on the Spectrum News app. Available on all of your favorite devices.
Hey, pal. Ready for bed?
Hey, Dad. Do we really have the